So, we are on. Hi everybody, welcome back to SENP 1001. We're looking at social entrepreneurship and social innovation perspectives, and as you know, we're starting to do podcast interviews to get what's really going on out there in relationship to the textbooks that you're learning. So today we have with us an interview with Sally, and Sally, I'm going to hand this over to you to introduce yourself. Sally actually has done some work with some of our community project initiative students and Dress for Success. Sally is an Interweave coach, but I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to pass that over to you. Sally, so tell us, what's on your business card?
Thank you. Thanks very much. And thanks for asking me to participate in this. I'm excited about the course and what everybody's learning. So it's a great honor for me to be talking to you today. I work with an organization called Social Impact Advisors, and we're consultants that have done a lot of work in the past few years with the McConnell Foundation, specifically with its Interweave program. Interweave is a project or an initiative that looks at providing tools for social innovation to not-for-profit organizations, startups, foundations, governments across Canada. And we've been involved with impact and strategic clarity, which is one of the modules of that program, and also with scaling impact and with collective impact. So we've had the real exciting honor to be involved with about 150 organizations across the country, working on their impact in those various ways. So most recently, in your area, I've been working on a scaling impact project with Dress for Success, as you mentioned, Nicole. And that's been fun, looking at how the existing small organization can make its footprint a little bit bigger and serve more people. So I'm happy to talk through that, but I'm also happy to talk more generally about, what is serious change, which I know you've talked about already, and why you want to test it and what implications that has for scaling. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, you guys, it's been really interesting to watch you sort of work with the students and sort of break down the Interweave process. I found it quite fascinating. So we were talking with Lindsay Telfler from the Canadian Freshwater Alliance, and we sort of, she sort of gave us her framework about how she went from her theory of change to her, sort of big ambitious goal, and then how did that trickle down into sort of impact measures. So some of the things that, in observation of you working with Dress for Success, where we had a lot of conversations about scaling. And what is this thing called scaling in relationship to the theory of change, and why is it important? So, do you have any, you work with a lot of clients around this, so tell us a little bit about this concept of scaling the social enterprise.
Right. Well, scaling is really just having more impact beyond your current area of influence. So you can either scale out, and that's about sort of replicating and disseminating or adapting what you already know works to a broader geography or to more people. And there's scaling up, and that's sort of working to realize on opportunities and to break down barriers in a more broad system approach. And you're really looking in that case at what are the root causes of some complex problems. So, there's two sort of branches of scaling, scaling out and scaling up, and then there's various ways of doing that scaling where you have more or less control over your product or your idea out there in the landscape. So I can talk a little bit about that. I did, though, want to talk about the theory of change sort of as a follow-on to your last interview, because I think it's really important whether you're doing, collective impact or scaling impact, or you're looking at your own organization and focusing your strategy on impact to build a theory of change. And to not just, sort of draw a picture in a room of what your theory of change is and say, yeah, that's great, that's our theory of change, but to really thoroughly test it. And I think, we often call this pressure testing, where, you sort of kick the tires on your theory of change to make sure that it's really strong. And you can do that by looking at the program that you're trying to replicate in the case of scaling and saying, what is it about this program that's successful? What makes it work? Is it the people we've got working? Is it the context in our community? What accounts for our success? And by doing that analysis, you'll be able to know what you want to replicate or disseminate a lot more clearly. You could also test your theory of change by sort of looking beyond yourselves at the evidence. So your theory of change says, if we do these things, we expect that these outcomes will result. Well, what's the evidence to say that that's really true? What's the evidence to say that that's really the best choice of interventions for driving that particular outcome? So looking at the evidence beyond yourself is another great way of testing your theory of change. Probably most importantly, when you're thinking about developing a theory of change for an initiative you want to scale, is looking at the landscape beyond yourself. So, there's an old saying about good strategy, and that's, there's many things worth doing, but maybe not necessarily by you. So understand who else is out there in the landscape who's interested in achieving the same outcomes that you are, who's interested in working with the same population that you are, and figure out how you fit into that landscape. Because all of that is going to help you build a stronger theory of change, and that is going to help you make better decisions and help you build a better strategy for scaling your idea further.
Yeah. So in your experience with working with clients, what has been the toughest to get them? So you nailed on a really good point. Is you can't be all things to all people, essentially.
Yeah.
And so, how do you find that when you walk into organizations and you sort of say that? What do you get from that? Like, what usually happens? And say, listen, you guys want to do this. You want to move forward. You want to scale. There's some things you're going to have to let go here.
Yeah. And you also have to, there's things you might have to let go, and there's also things that you might have to just trust yourself to fail on. So, if you find that there's a gap, when you're looking at your theory of change and saying, these are all the levers I need to press to achieve this outcome, and you find that there's a gap, there's a lever you don't have, then you might have to say, that's something we don't have the capacity to do. We're going to have to find a partner to help us do that. Or we're going to have to build up our capacity in some way to be able to do that. And people, with great ideas, who are proud of those great ideas, want to hold on to them themselves and want to execute on them themselves. But sometimes, by taking a really hard look and a clear look at what you're trying to achieve, you're better able to say, it's clear to me that we're going to need more help, or we're going to have to change the outcome we're shooting for, or resequence what we're trying to achieve, because we understand our capacity and we understand the landscape that's out there. But I know it's hard for people to share their ideas sometimes, but that's really what scaling is all about, right? Getting your idea out in the world and having other people act on it too.
Yeah, very much so. Well, you can't, and the question sometimes is should a social enterprise scale?
Yeah, and it's not for everybody. If you are thinking about scaling your idea and something that you're doing is really working well, and you want to disseminate it or replicate it further, you have to take some time to think about what are your motivations behind scaling. So are you trying to have more impact on the problem? Are you trying to access some new funding sources? Do you just have a desire to grow the organization? So, if this is good, then more of it must be better. Or are you kind of responding to something coming from your funder or something coming from your board? Really understanding what your motivations are for scaling is a good place to start. If you are scaling your impact by taking on a brand new population and providing a brand new service to that population, that's really a radical change. And it takes a lot of capacity and planning to do that well. So, having a hard look at your own organization and your capacity to execute on it is probably a good idea.
And what would be a way that you would start looking at capacity? Like, are there any tools or methodologies that you do when you say, okay, we've got to look at our motivations, we've got to go back to our theory of change, or maybe we don't have a theory of change. What are some of those methodologies you use to look at capacity?
Yeah, there's a really good tool called the McMillan Matrix that people look at to sort of evaluate where they are in relation to what's needed for the particular problem. So, if it's a new initiative that you want to add where there's a lot of alternative coverage, and you're in a strong competitive position, then you want to negotiate with some other organizations to get it done. If the alternative coverage for that kind of initiative is low, then you're going to need to grow to achieve more impact. If you have a weak competitive sort of position relative to other organizations in this space, then that's something you want to give away. So this whole sort of adapted McMillan Matrix helps you sort of understand what the different options are. Should we partner with other people? Should we grow ourselves to achieve more impact? Should we give this away to others because other people are better positioned to do it? Should we partner with other people? Should we try and do this collectively with somebody else so they can share the load or help us find some resources? If the alternatives are low, if there's nobody else in the space that can do it, and you're really great at doing it, then there's your opportunity to. That's something that you really want to scale and grow your capacity for doing. If it's not a good fit with your mission and your capabilities, your capacity right now, you can give it away. There's no harm in sharing that idea with people who might have more capacity to do it. And you can just share the idea, or you can be involved with sort of giving the idea away systematically. So getting together with others who might be able to carry the ball forward where you can't. All of those are approaches to deciding whether you go ahead or whether you pull back and say, we're not in a position to do this now.
That's great. So what made you go into this? Like, how did you fall into this in your life? Like, what was your sort of you're talking like a pro, so
I don't know about the pro thing, but I sometimes describe myself as a refugee from corporate Canada. So I worked for many years in financial services industry downtown in Toronto, and I got to and at the same time I was doing volunteer work, sitting on boards of not-for-profit organizations, and it sort of started over the years to become clear to me that there might be a better use of my skills. That I'd learned in corporate world out there in the not-for-profit world, and it might be more satisfying for me to sort of explore that. So the McConnell Foundation actually put out a call across Canada for people to work with the Bridgespan organization who McConnell had hired to develop this whole Interweave program. And so I was one of the people lucky enough. I had just sort of started in this consulting role I decided to do. And so I was lucky enough to be one of the people that began with Bridgespan and Interweave in the early days. And I did find that, a lot of the concepts around, being very focused on what your strategy is and what you're trying to accomplish, really was useful in thinking for not-for-profit work. Thinking about the whole sort of community and the impact you're trying to make on the community, rather than thinking about thinking about the impact you're having on individuals, I thought was a useful approach to thinking about not-for-profit management and strategy. You have a lot of not-for-profits where you are making definite important impacts on individuals that you work with, But if you step back and look at, here are the resources we have available to us. Are we spending them in the most impactful way? And, by doing that step back and thinking strategically, you can probably have more of an impact than if you just, serve individuals and serve, the next guy who knocks on the door. So it's been great, and I've been doing this over the last 9 years. I've given away my age, I suppose. So over the last 9 years, I've been working in the not-for-profit space as a consultant, and bringing some of those sensibilities that I got from being a board member for so many years, but also some of the skills about focus, measurement, and looking at the big picture that I had, from my corporate experience.
So, from your experience, who's sort of doing the scaling game well? So, I guess maybe I'll back it up a bit. So, in terms of the landscape, who would you think are some of the top, sort of movers and shakers? Obviously, we've discussed in previous recordings we are interviewing Dan Kershaw. We've interviewed Dan Kershaw, the executive director of Furniture Bank, and ironically enough, he talks about some of the same themes you talk about in the migration from corporate to nonprofit. Which is interesting. But what do you think the landscape is? Like, who out there right now in terms of is putting some markers on social enterprise from your perspective, or social innovation in general?
Yeah, there's a lot of great examples, and the idea of scaling what works and figuring out what works has a lot of currency, across the not-for-profit landscape. There's lots of great articles that can, give you insights into who's doing well. I recommend people read that Stanford article about scaling impact. I think it was written by somebody from the Bridgespan organization, and it talks about how you do scaling well. But people out there in the landscape, you've got really great examples of scaling well. Is Habitat for Humanity, for instance, is a great example of having a good idea about having people invest their sweat equity in creating new housing for themselves and having the support of the community around them to do that. And Habitat is across the world now building in communities. And that's an example of, sort of disseminating a good idea in a loose sort of association way. Local Habitats for Humanities all have their own boards. They all are responsible for their own sort of bills and deciding their own priorities. But they have the Habitat model to go on, and they have support from Habitat to run their organizations, and they have, the big footprint of Habitat across the world to get them some support in their local communities. So they're a great example. ArtSmart is an example in Ontario that people often think about. So they provide curriculum, they provide supports, they provide communications for people running arts programs after school, which has tons of important positive impacts for the kids that are enrolled in them. But they took their good idea and shared it more broadly. So they're a kind of an umbrella organization that's been able to share their idea more broadly and have it done on the ground. When you think about scaling up, a huge example that people often refer to is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So, they were worried about the incidence of deaths related to driving under the influence, and decided that sort of the unit of change they were looking at was changing people's behavior about driving while under the influence. And they realized that there was a lot of sort of opportunities out there to change that behavior, to influence individuals in how they behave. So, they did a lot of advocacy work, changing public perception, giving people ideas around designated drivers, changing the laws about penalties, and so on. So they had a lot of levers for change, for changing behavior and changing public perception. So instead of just working in one community, they were able to work more broadly across all of North America, actually, on changing public perception. And the incidence of driving under the influence has gone way, way, way down, and it's become really socially unacceptable to do it now.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge success in terms of scaling impact beyond yourself.
Yeah, and that's really and that's something where we look at this concept where you can create sort of a social enterprise, or you see an opportunity where you can fill a gap with sort of anything, just a social enterprise or whatever, and that truly is an example of where we've gone, and it really dove into a systemic change, right? Because it truly tackled policy, it tackled mindsets, it tackled education, it tackled even like the responsibility of corporations to be aware of, maybe we should take some accountability for the fact that we've produced a product that causes intoxication.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there's lots of new examples coming up. There's an organization called Sustainability Collab that's working in Ontario, and they are trying to work in individual communities. So I think they've got 3 or 4 communities now, and they're trying to broaden and scale out to more communities in Ontario and also across Canada. But it's about encouraging businesses to behave sustainably, in their supply chain, in their packaging, in their hiring, in the footprint that they make, in their manufacturing processes, and so on. So the Sustainability Collab is taking their good idea that they have in a couple of communities, building a tipping point among businesses in their community acting sustainably, and they're really building a movement around sustainable business. Another great example, I think, of disseminating a great idea and getting it to scale is B Corp. So social impact advisors that I work with just became a B Corp. So I'm familiar with what it takes to get there. But they're trying to disseminate this idea that corporations need to be interested in profit because they have to pay the rent and pay their employees, but they also can serve all of us better by being interested in people that they hire and serve and the planet. So you can get a B Corp certification, and they take you through this whole certification process, and you overhaul all of your policies, you overhaul your supply chain, you overhaul your procedures and your hiring practices to make sure that you're thinking about people and the planet as well as profit. And like-minded people who are interested in that are attracted to businesses that care about people and the planet. And so it's a way to encourage business to build, their prospective consumer base and partnership base at the same time as being nicer to the planet. So these are all great examples of taking a good idea and scaling it beyond yourself. You can do it by sort of branching out and replicating, or you can do it by building a network or an association, or just by, promulgating your idea out there in the world and see who takes it up. So there's lots of ways to build your impact without necessarily, building out your organization.
Yeah, so that's a really great point. So when you think in the corporate world, you think about scaling. Franchising comes to mind, distribution, licensing, right? It would all be kind of those sort of for-profit terms. But it's interesting what you've mentioned here. So you've talked about movements, you've talked about sharing, you've talked about collaboration, working groups, very different. And I think it goes back down to motivation again. Right, is sort of what's your motivation for scaling, right? Obviously, in a franchising model, it's really about increasing your distribution, right?
Right.
In a licensing, and essentially you own a process, own a process or a brand, and that's the value, right? And distribution a little bit more controlled, right? So.
Right. And if you bring it around sort of full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning about your theory of change. So what is it you're really trying to accomplish? If you're trying to have an impact in the world or on a particular population or, driving a certain result, what's the best way to get there? It might not just be growing your organization. It might be in partnering or building networks or just, sharing your idea more broadly. If your motivator is the impact, you'll probably make better and more successful decisions about how to get there than if your motivator is just growth. And I understand growth as an important idea to people because, not-for-profits have lots of trouble, finding funding and resources to do things like pay the rent and, buy computers and all of those things that people refer to as operating costs. And sometimes, you can get more support for your operating costs if you grow bigger and bigger because, there's some percentage that's allocated for administration in any of these contracts that you win. But if growth if your only motivator for growth is, attracting additional funding or being able to have a bigger cushion for your administration, then you probably won't be in the right mindset for thinking about impact. And you can really go off the rails, I think, by doing it that way.
Yeah, very, very, very true. That just stunningly true. So that goes back to, again, like this concept of the landscape before theory, right? So this would all sort of be part of that landscape idea, right? So, what are your motivations? Is it growth? Is it, impact? And then I would assume that would formulate, too, the focus by which your landscape scan would happen. So, and we talked about this when we worked with Dress for Success, really getting the students to understanding what landscape was. And can you walk us through a little bit about this sort of process of the landscape scan, not only in the beginning of the theory of change, but also looking at how you would grow? And how do you break out this landscape scan? Like, what lenses do you look at? Is it part of the motivation again? And what are you looking for when you're doing these landscape scans?
Well, I guess I'll start with the motivation. So if your motivation is on impact rather than competition, you're probably in a better space. So, I've worked with some social enterprises where they do the landscape scan, but they think about it as a competitive analysis. Mm-hmm. And I think that, and that's a very corporate kind of approach. And, some social enterprises get to a certain size and they start to drift, I find, into some corporate motivation. So, we've got to be paying the rent and keeping the lights on, and they start to lose sight of allocating their effort or focusing their effort on impact. If they think about looking at the landscape from a competitive perspective, what new clients can we win versus what more impact can we have, then they're going to make some fundamentally questionable decisions, I think. So to start with, when you're looking at the landscape, think of it as who else is interested in having the same impact I am. Who are potential allies in the fight versus who are my competitors. So looking at that landscape, you want to see if you're trying to have an effect on a particular population, if you're trying to serve a particular population, if you're trying to improve things for people with disabilities, for instance, or you're trying to improve, youth graduation rates or whatever it is your particular impact is, who else is interested in those same outcomes in the landscape? So if you're looking at a cross-Canada project, who else across Canada is interested in that same kind of outcome goal as you are? Or if you're looking in your community, or you're looking to even scale more broadly, in your region rather than just in your community, who else is interested in those same kind of outcomes? And then also, and who is interested in that same population? So who's already working with that same population? There's no point in coming up with a new program that has a lot of overlap with a bunch of existing programs that are already out there. So figure out, who's working with the same group. Now, what are they doing? What are they doing that works already? So maybe our idea can help their idea work better rather than just replacing it. So sort of figuring out how you fit and how your idea fits into that broader landscape will help you focus your effort more clearly. So you're not redoing what other people are already doing. You're not working in conflict with what other people are already doing, but you understand how you can fit into that landscape. Now, that doesn't mean that the landscape is necessarily static. You can have an influence on that landscape. And if you have a ton of clarity about what it is you're trying to achieve, you'll be a more interesting person to talk to with everyone else in that landscape, because you'll have a clarity of purpose that they can really understand and work with you on. So, yeah, I would say the biggest thing is don't think about looking at the landscape in terms of your competitors. Think of it in terms of your partners and all of us fighting the same fight.
Right. And would you put stakeholders on that as well? So you would look at partners, stakeholders, and then you would be able to sort of put that into a quadrant and say, okay, they would make a great stakeholder. These guys would make a great partner. These would make a great customer. And
For sure.
Yeah. So really segmenting out your landscape.
You want to understand what your funders are interested in. You want to understand what your beneficiaries and their allies are interested in, and other agencies or organizations out there in the field and what they're interested in as well. Understanding the landscape from all those perspectives, I would say, is really important. One thing that when we build theories of change with organizations or groups of organizations working on collective projects is when we think about who the beneficiaries of this work is, so you can really target your effort on the people who are going to benefit. People get mixed up a lot about who the beneficiaries are, and they start talking sometimes about, well, the funders are a beneficiary because they want us to do this. Or the community is a beneficiary because they have this gap in the community that they want to fill. I think all of your efforts should be focused on the end beneficiary. You're going to make better decisions if you figure out what's the impact on the end beneficiary, and then everyone else is coming along with you as a partner, as a stakeholder, as a supporter, as a lever that you're going to press or a resource that you're going to draw on to have the impact on that end beneficiary. But I think you make better decisions if you focus on what's the change I'm actually going to make.
Very much.
I'll just say that example that we often use in strategy work around mothers against drunk driving, I should say. They sort of have this idea about what's the end unit of change. If we're going to be successful, what's the most important thing to change? And that's the behavior of individuals. And then you look at sort of what are the opportunities to change the behavior of individuals, and what are the barriers that are in the way of changing the behavior of individuals. And that's the first two clues you need to create a great strategy. So, bringing the points of view of all of your stakeholders and funders and beneficiaries and their allies together to help you inform what are the opportunities and what are the barriers we're trying to break down, the better you'll be.
Yeah, well, I think you've hit on something really, really important around the beneficiary side of things, because people do that. It muddies the waters a little bit, and I think that goes back to being very clear on what it is that you're going to be doing, and it just keeps going back to what are you here for? What are you doing? And so that's great. So that's a really great way of explaining that.
One other thing that I should add too is that the more of this sort of pressure testing you do of your theory of change by engaging with people like your funders and other stakeholders, the more you'll be able to refine it. So, it could be that you have to change your target beneficiaries a little. You have to redefine, what's the range of age groups in this population, or, what geographic scope is there around these beneficiaries. You'll be able to refine your theory of change a lot and focus on which beneficiaries you're going to have an impact on if you consult with these people more broadly in the landscape.
Right. So, and that's a really great point. And I think there's two things out of that. One, it's this idea that it's not, the theory of change is not a stagnant piece. It's not something that, okay, we're just going to write it down. It's sort of, this is what we're going to do. It really is a thoughtful piece that takes a while, and it's a working document. It's sort of, I equate it almost like to a website. People do their website and they think they're done, but it ends up becoming this evolving thing that just never ends. And while I think there's an ending around a theory of change when you get to the impact side of it, but you're right, it has to morph as you get more information and you get more feedback and so if you are making impact in that area, then you kind of have to pivot a bit because you've actually affected change. So now where does your organization sit? So
right.
Very cool.
And it's going to help you make decisions in lots of things you do. So you might get approached by a funder to take on a certain kind of project, and by looking at your theory of change and thinking about your mission in the world and the outcome you're trying to produce, you can figure, does this fit with our capacity? Does it fit with what we're trying to achieve? Is it complementary to all these other levers that we're pressing to try and get to the outcome we're looking for? Or might it be a distraction? Might it be diluting our impact a little bit by branching off in this direction? So, being clear about your theory of change, measuring your impact against your theory of change, and using that knowledge and insight to continuously adapt it are all good ideas for having more impact in the world.
That's great. Okay, so a few more questions for you, Sally, and maybe they're short, maybe they're not. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about, approaching from more of a practical standpoint. Okay, so we have to do a landscape scan. We have to create our theory of change. We have to tire test. Where do I start? Like, what does that even mean? Like, am I doing surveys? Like, am I doing design thinking, observational research? Like, what am I doing? How do I do this?
Yeah. All of the above. No.
Great.
So start with so I would say the steps are, start with your impact. What are you trying to achieve for whom and by when? By when's a tough thing to get to, but it might help you think about sort of sequencing what should we do first. If you think, what do we think we can really achieve for whom and by when? Start with that. Then you're doing your theory of change. So if we're going to achieve all of this by this time frame, what do we need to do? What's our hypothesis about what we need to do? A theory of change, it's maybe a bit of a misnomer. A theory is something that we rely on, and in the beginning stages, it's really only a hypothesis that you haven't tested yet.
Right.
So anyway, you create this hypothesis, but then, just look. The steps are, you want to look at your data. So what information do you already have about what works and why? Look at the evidence. So go out there and interview a few people that you respect and have and you think have some good ideas for you or have some suggestions for you. These could be academics. These could be people in business. These could be in other organizations or in government. Run your hypothesis by them and say, what do you think? We think that this is what it's going to take to have this outcome. What do you think? And get their response. Often, everybody loves to give you advice. So go out and interview a few people you respect and get their advice. Another thing is sort of secondary research. So what's sort of out there, on the internet? What's out there that you can? I shouldn't say research, I should just say sort of inquiry. What's out there in the published journals you respect about how to achieve the outcome you're looking for. And then in the landscape, just, have a look at all of the other organizations in your catchment area or in the area you're trying to impact. And the best way I find is to go talk to them. But if there's a lot of them, you could do a survey. You could do. You could hold a symposium to invite people to and get their results, get their points of view. But basically, just getting out there and talking to people about the advice they can give and the insight they can add will help you make a better theory of change and hence a better strategy.
Right. And so all those people that you're talking about is once you've identified potential beneficiaries, potential stakeholders, you're kind of capturing all those conversations, essentially.
Yeah.
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 And from your perspective and your clients that you've been working with, what are some of the tools that they use? Like, do they use SurveyMonkey? Is it Google, is it a Google suite of products? Where do you find that, sort of startups are going, or even like mid-tier, like teenagers in this space are going for technology?
Yeah, SurveyMonkey is a big one, and I think that there's no substitute for talking to people, but you can really leverage technology to help you do that. So, you can hold a seminar, you can hold a conversation online and invite people to do that. There's lots of tools for doing online meetings. You can invite people to a symposium to sit down with you if you offer them something to make it worth their while to come. They can come and do that. I think it runs the gamut in terms of tools, but we all. It's a small world now, and we can connect online and Skype and webinars as easily as we can, go to actual meetings. So, leverage your technology to help you connect with people.
That's great. So, Sally, one more question for you. What's sort of over your career, and what's something that's memorable for you? Anything, just in terms of some of the work that you've done and why you continue to do what you do, and what's some of the kind of the more, I don't know, is there a tent peg for you over working in this sector and some of the work that you've done?
I'm not sure I can think of a single example, but maybe I can sort of talk about why I love my job so much.
Sure.
I tell my family that, I'm in exactly the right place. I'm so inspired all the time by people who are out there trying to make change in the world. And, I think of myself as a kind of a facilitator or a conduit for really smart people to focus their ideas. I'm not sure how much of an original thinker I am, but I think I'm good at recognizing original thinkers. and there are a lot of you out there. There are a lot of people with great ideas, and it's been so gratifying to me to help people, get to the point where they can turn their great ideas into, concrete, deliverable, actionable plans to have things happen. The strategy work that I tend to do with people takes a while. We work one-on-one with organizations, or we work with collectives of many organizations coming together, and we might work with you for 6 months, but at various points along that work with people, there will be big eureka moments, where people realize, I can give up doing this because I'm going to focus my effort on that. Or, I can leverage this idea and share it with others and have a bigger impact. Or, I can bring on this new approach, and it's going to make our work have more impact in our community. So it's, a huge collection of eureka moments from these, thinkers who are trying to make change in the world and trying to make it a better place. It's all been very gratifying.
Well, it's great. Well, it's cool. It's inspiring to be around people who are inspired. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you put it much better and much more succinctly than I have.
It's okay. So, it's purely a one-time only shot for you. Anyway, so any advice that you have to a future social entrepreneur? Anything that you could say, like, don't give up, keep trying. What do you got? Anything for our students?
Yeah, like keep on going. There's a lot of negativity out there in the world, and people, are thinking, wow, we're not in a great place. I am constantly inspired by young people who have the guts and the determination and the confidence to go out there and make change. And I don't think that your confidence is misplaced. I've heard some of the greatest ideas and interesting perspectives from young people. I think you want to give yourself permission. As Roger Martin, I think, says, fail early and often. Try things, and if they don't work out, you'll have learned from them. Carve out a chunk of things that you can make change on. Like that, you're not gonna change the world, but carve out something that you can achieve and focus your effort on achieving it, and then learn from the result you get. Take some incremental steps to getting to the goals you have for your community and the world, and I guarantee you that you'll learn from those, and you'll be able to accomplish the change you see. I have tons of confidence in the young generation that you're going to save us all from ourselves.
Yeah, I hope so. But yeah, I love that idea. Carve out your niche. I think that's brilliant. Carve out your niche, baby steps, stay focused. I love it. It's brilliant.
Great.
Brilliant. Anyway, Sally, thank you so much for talking with us today. If the students want to reach out or want to learn more about what you do you have a website they can go to?
Yes, it's www. I probably don't have to say that anymore. Socialimpactadvisors.ca.
Awesome, and I'll also make sure that that's in Blackboard for everyone as well too. So, anyway, Sally, thank you so much, and again, thank you for talking to our students. Thank you for working with Georgian. You've done a tremendous amount of work with some of our students at the CPI program as well, and Dresser Success. So, one of our community partners. So that's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me, and all the best to all of you. Everyone take care.